Okay, so we are going to create the UVs for this cube right here. So if I select the object and I go to my perspective UV editor, okay, you can see right here that these are the UVs for our box, and we will talk about how to create UVs in the next video. We are going to create what's called a UV texture that will allow us to see if we have laid out our UVs correctly, if one of our panels is flipped, and we'll cover that in the next video and how to fix that. But this new texture will allow us to see if there's any distortion in our UVs. It will help us edit and tweak the UVs so we can get rid of that distortion. Okay. As you can see, we have the perspective and the UV editor layout, right? Two vertical panels side by side. I've created one for the Hypershade and the perspective, but let me show you where the Hypershade can be found. The Hypershade is inside of Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. When we click on the Hypershade, we will get a floating window. What makes the Hypershade? Inside of the Hypershade, you have the browser. To the right, you have the property editor. If I select one of my shaders by click select, you will notice that the property editor is the same thing as the attribute editor right here. Alright, we get the same elements as the attribute editor. Let me go back to the channels. To the right of the property editor, we have the material viewer. So if we start tweaking the color, the reflectivity, and all the other attributes for this material inside of the property editor, we will see those changes reflected in real time inside of our material viewer. Then we have the create. This is where we will create a shader and where we can assign specific things to our shaders, such as a file node, so we can bring in a texture file for the color of our shader. And once we do that, we can control everything inside of our nodes, the connections, the in connections, and the out connections to the different elements that make up a shader. Alright, so let's start by creating a two-panel Hypershade and perspective layout. I'm going to close the Hypershade. And the way that you do that is your right mouse button in one of these icons right here, and I'm going to go to Edit Layouts. Alright, so what I want is under Edit Layouts, I'm going to select two panels side by side. Under Contents, on the first one, I'm going to pick Perspective Panel, and for the second one, I'm going to select the Hypershade. And as you can see, I have the Hypershade on the right hand side and the perspective on the left hand side. Because the property editor and the attribute editor are redundant, what I'm going to do, I'm going to close the channel and the attribute editor so I can get more room to look at what I'm doing. Okay, I'm going to make the Hypershade bigger. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create our first shader. I'm going to go to create, and these are all the materials inside of Maya that we can create for our object, right? They are a group of favorites, and these are the most used shaders right here. So the one that we want is a Lambert. This default material right here, it's a Lambert. So I'm going to select the Lambert, right? As soon as I select it, I can rename it right here. I'm going to call this UV texture matte for material. All right. And in the common material properties, I can change these attributes, right, to anything that I want. So if I want to select a color, I will click on red, and as you can see, our material viewer is showing us what it will look like with the color red. Now we want to create a texture pattern to see the distortion of the material once we create the UVs. And in order to do that, to the right hand side of every attribute that we have inside of our shader, you will see this checker icon right here. When I click on it, Maya is going to open the Create Render Node window. Inside of the Create Render Node window, we will see that we can add all sorts of 2D, 3D nodes. And what I want to create, it's called a file node. Okay, if you cannot see the node right here, but you know the name, all you have to do is hit the first letter, F, and the Create Render node will limit what you can see based on the first letter that you typed in. You can make your nodes bigger or smaller, so no icons. And again, I'm going to select File, and as soon as I do that, notice that my property editor's window has gone into the file attribute. Okay, so if I expand this open, let me make this smaller. Okay, so I'm going to click right here under image name, where you see this little folder, and I'm going to find my file. And as you can see, Maya will take me directly to the source image folder. I'm going to select my UV texture _01. All right, this is what the image looks like, and I'm going to hit open. And immediately you can see the material viewer has assigned this new texture onto this little preview ball. Okay, now our image has a texture. So how do we assign a shader to an object? Right, you will notice that we've created this shader right here, but our object still looks the same. It has the Lambert one, right? So to assign a shader, there's two ways that we can do it. We can select the object, right mouse button, and we can go all the way to the bottom, and we can either go assign an existing material, one from our favorites, or we can create a new material. If we go assign new material, we can go to the UV text matte. You can see the importance of naming your shaders from the get-go. Now, the easiest way to assign a material from the Hypershade is you hold the middle mouse button and you just drag your material onto the object. Now, the material has been assigned, but we cannot see it. Remember in one of the previous videos how we talked about the shortcuts for unsmooth being 1, smooth and cage being 2, smooth being 3, and then 4 for wireframe, 5 for the default shader. Let me go back to 1, and if I hit 6, now we can see our texture. Alright, and this is how you create a basic UV texture shader in Maya's Hypershade.